This critique of Kamala Harris's recent 60 Minutes interview is a clear attempt to portray the vice president as unprepared and uncomfortable when faced with tough, substantive questions. The writer opens by setting the stage. With just 4 weeks until a critical election, Harris, who has largely avoided hard-hitting interviews in recent months, finally sat down for what is described as her most serious one yet. The tone is immediately dismissive, with a sarcastic reference to her as a wannabe commandant-in-chief and a suggestion that she has previously been treated with kid gloves by the media. The implication here is that the vice president has enjoyed a cushy relationship with much of the mainstream press, benefiting from what the author describes as the journalistic equivalent of a spa day. This metaphor is stretched further as the writer likens her past interviews to pampering sessions, with different journalists offering her everything from mud masks to metaphorical back rubs. The mention of specific journalist Stephanie Ruhle is intended to underscore the claim that Harris has been protected from real scrutiny, receiving favorable treatment and softball questions. However, the critique takes a sharper turn when it comes to Harris's interaction with 60 Minutes journalist Bill Whitaker, who, according to the author, doesn't participate in such gentle treatment. The piece asserts that Whitaker opened the interview with a serious and potentially uncomfortable question for Harris, asking about U.S. influence over Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Specifically, he inquired why the U.S., which provides Israel with billions of dollars in military aid, seems to have little sway over Netanyahu's decisions. This moment is framed as the beginning of Harris's confrontation with a real question, setting the stage for what the writer believes was a revealing moment of discomfort or panic from the vice president. By suggesting that Harris was caught off guard or even alarmed by this line of questioning, the writer is clearly pushing a narrative that portrays her as unprepared for the complexities of governing or foreign policy. The mention of creeping panic behind Kamala's eyes implies that Harris is not only unprepared, but also deeply aware of her own shortcomings when faced with such scrutiny. This framing ties into a broader criticism often levied against her, particularly by conservative commentators, who argue that her political career has been marked by avoiding difficult questions or situations. Furthermore, the critique implies that Harris's prior interviews with journalists were not only easy, but actively designed to shield her from any real challenges. The use of words like slobbering tongue bath and emotional support dog is hyperbolic and inflammatory, meant to undermine both Harris and the credibility of the journalists who interviewed her. This language suggests that the media, in the eyes of the author, is complicit in propping up Harris without holding her accountable for her record or positions. By contrast, Whitaker is depicted as a rare journalist willing to press Harris on substantive issues, such as U.S.-Israel relations. This comparison is designed to elevate Whitaker's interview as a more authentic and revealing moment, one that supposedly exposes Harris's vulnerability and inability to handle difficult questions. The piece seems to argue that when finally confronted with real scrutiny, Harris falters, suggesting that her reliance on vibes or charisma is insufficient when it comes to the hard realities of governance and foreign policy. In the broader context of political commentary, this kind of critique is not unusual, especially as elections approach and media appearances become more scrutinized. The portrayal of Harris as someone who avoids difficult interviews or questions aligns with a certain narrative pushed by her political opponents, who often frame her as out of her depth or overly reliant on her personal charm rather than policy expertise. This particular piece leans heavily on sarcasm and derogatory language to make that point, casting her previous media appearances as frivolous and lacking substance. Ultimately, this critique of Harris's 60 Minutes interview appears to be part of a broader effort to challenge her readiness and competence as vice president, especially in the face of international and domestic challenges. Whether or not this portrayal is accurate likely depends on one's political perspective, but it is clear that the author's goal is to depict Harris as a politician who struggles when removed from the comfort of a supportive media environment.